Hi, I'm Marcus Hutzel, and this is the Tamron 17-28 f2.8 E-mount lens for Sony cameras. And in this video, I'm going to do a quick comparison between it and one of its major competitors, the Sony G-Master 16-35 f2.8. And to be clear, I bought the Tamron myself up front, and I just happened to have access to this Sony 16-35 for about a week, and I've had a chance to test it out and just, take some pictures, take some video, and get a feel for the lens. It's not mine, unfortunately, but even if it was, I'm not sure it's the lens for me. Now, there are a ton of videos out there talking about these two lenses, and there's plenty of technical data in those videos, plenty of pixel peeping into the images that they can take, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail in the differences between sharpness and vignetting, chromatic aberration, all that stuff, because they're very close in quality. And although those things are important, those questions were already answered for me on this lens from many other YouTube videos, so I knew the image quality was going to be outstanding and pretty much on par with the G-Master. And I already own the Tamron 28-75 2.8, which I've been using for a while, and I'm quite happy with it. And it's what you're seeing right now. I'm using my Sony a7 III to film this video. So the quality of the Tamron 17-28 wasn't and isn't an issue for me. So if you're in the market for a wide-angle lens like I was, then the Tamron 17-28 is a great one to get. I chose the Tamron over the Sony for a few reasons. The two main reasons being the size and weight difference, and of course, the cost. Size-wise, of course, this is the Tamron, and this is the G-Master. That is quite the difference in size and heft. The Tamron is really quite compact. And of course, cost. If you know anything about either one of these lenses, you know that the Sony 16-35 G-Master is more than double the price of the Tamron. This is expensive. It's what many would think a professional needs or should have, but it's not always about the tools you have or how much they cost, it's how you use them. Now don't get me wrong, $850 is no small amount of money necessarily, but in comparison to the G-Master, it's a lot less. Because again, to me, being a professional doesn't mean you need to have a fancy emblem on your lens, or your car, or your shoes, or whatever it is. Anyone can buy equipment. So if you want to have an assortment of lenses from long zooms to wide zooms and primes, and you want to carry them around day to day, I'd think about how much all that glass weighs. Because if you're like me and you want to have one daily bag that carries your laptop, your camera gear, any lenses, all the accessories you need day to day, that weight adds up, and the Tamron is going to keep your load lighter. And some might argue that the Sony Zeiss 16-35 f4 lens is more comparable to the Tamron because of the price and because of the compactness. But the Zeiss is an f4 lens, and I wanted the widest aperture I could get. I like that shallow depth of field, you can get more light into the lens, and that meant f2.8 for me, no f4. So let's go over some of the things I think are great about this lens. Again, the size. It is compact. I mean, look at this thing, especially sitting next to the G-Master. There's a lot to be said for small lenses. These are both f2.8 and constant through their zoom range. But the G-Master is just a lot bigger and heavier, and I think that's important because when you put this lens on the camera, this thing becomes massive. It's like a tank in your hands. And I think that's one of the biggest cons of the G-Master is its large size. The Tamron is also weather sealed, but then again, so is the G-Master. And again, the cost. The Tamron right now is going for $849 US. The G-Master, about $2,000. That's a lot of money, and we'll go into what you get for that extra money later. Another thing I like, the Tamron doesn't change sizes when it zooms. There's no barrel extending out. All of the zooming is internal. And I think that's great. It keeps the lens the same size, so you don't have to zoom it in or out physically just to fit it in the slot in your bag. The Sony, on the other hand, does extend, but it extends somewhat backwards, as you may know. When you're zoomed all the way in at 35, it's at its shortest, and when you zoom out to 16 at its widest, it actually extends. Not a whole lot, but it is a difference. and it makes the lens longer when you want to be at 16 millimeters. Not a huge deal, but when you need to put everything back in your camera bag, you're going to have to usually zoom it back into 35 to make it the most compact. And then when you grab it for a quick photo or video, it's at the long end of the zoom range. And if you're buying a wide angle zoom, like either one of these lenses, I'd be willing to bet that you'd want to start at the widest. You'd want to know that when you pick up the camera, it's at its widest and ready to go. Otherwise, why did you buy a wide angle lens? And this did get me like every single time when I took the camera out of the bag with the G-Master lens and the barrel was all the way in. I would look through it and go, oh, this doesn't look very wide. Why not? Because I was at 35, not really knowing it in my head. So every single time I had to zoom it out to 16. And so it just slowed down some of my shots. And that's just how I like to use it. I like to know that when the barrel is in, it's kind of at its widest. And I have to extend the barrel out to zoom in. But that's just semantics, and it's usually not a big deal. It's just something to note. Some things I don't like about the Tamron. I wish it was just a bit wider. I wish it matched the Sony's 16 millimeter on the wide end. So yes, there's a small difference, 16 millimeters, 17 millimeters, but I don't think it's enough to make or break your decision. It didn't stop me from getting the Tamron. You can zoom with your feet, you can back up, you can walk forward, and I just don't think the difference between 16 millimeters and 17 millimeters is enough to warrant the price and weight difference of these two lenses. And on the long end, yes, this one goes to 35, this one only goes to 28, but to be honest, there's not a whole lot of difference between 28 and 35. You can walk in a little further, and again, it's a wide angle lens. 35 is bordering on narrow, so I don't see it as a major difference and one that would stop me from getting this one over this one. Unfortunately, the Tamron is not stabilized in lens, but neither is the G-Master. The only one that I know that is stabilized is the Zeiss f4 version, but again, f4, f2.8. Build quality, I'm just fine with the build quality of Tamron lenses. Again, I own the 28-75. I've had no issues with it. A lot of people say that these Sony models are, all metal, but it also makes them heavier. And to be honest, I just take care of my gear. It always goes in a soft padded area in the bag, and I'm very careful with it, and my gear stays like new for years. There are no buttons on the Tamron lens. There's no automatic or manual focus switch, no focus hold button. And I'm used to that, again, with the Tamron 28-75. It would have been nice to see a manual focus switch or at least one custom button, but it is what it is. The Sony, on the other hand, does have a custom button which you can program in camera, and it has a switch which puts the lens into automatic or manual focus. So I have limited time with the G-Master lens, and I want to get some pictures to show you the differences, so let's head out. So I actually came out early this morning to get some pictures with both the Tamron and the Sony because I wanted to A/B them and show you the differences or lack thereof between the lenses. Unfortunately, it is cloudy and raining this morning, and yes, I can get some pictures. I'd really rather not get the equipment wet, so... And remember, both of these lenses are weather sealed, so not that big of a deal. Some of the clouds may be clearing up, and hopefully we'll get some good pictures. And of course, it's just my luck that today is the last day I have the Sony lens, so it's today or nothing. Wish me luck. And to be honest, I actually like the colors out of the Tamron better than the G-Master. The Tamron seemed just a bit warmer and a tad more saturated, and to me just gave a more pleasing image directly out of camera. Autofocus in video works just fine on the Tamron. I find these autofocus tests between lenses really hard to prove which one is better because it really just depends on what the camera is seeing at the time given the situation. But the Tamron's autofocus seems just fine. And for comparison, here's the Sony. And as you can see, the Tamron also picks up my face, as does the Sony. So what do you get for all that extra money you would pay to get the Sony? Well, you get some function buttons on the outside, you get a little bit wider field of view on the wide end, you'd get a little bit more punch in on the zoom on the long end, you'd get to carry around a lot more weight, and to my eyes you'd get slightly cooler colors with the Sony. Oh yeah, and you get a lighter bank account. One little quirk about the Sony, if you're in front of the camera, so if you're looking at this lens in this fashion, if the camera were here and you're looking at it, you can't see the millimeter markings on the lens because they are actually kind of over this ridge right there. So again, not a huge deal. If you're behind the camera, it's no big deal. You can see the markings right there. But I found myself wanting to test this lens on my camera, so I had it sitting on the desk over here, and I wanted to test it at different focal lengths, knowing what those focal lengths are to kind of know where I need to put the camera and what length I need to be at, etc., etc. And I just found that when it's sitting over there like that, I literally can't read what focal length it's at. I had to stand up and look over the barrel to read it. Again, not a big deal, but just something to note if you're going to be in front of the lens a lot and you want to know exactly what millimeter you're at. Whereas the Tamron, you can read the millimeters from pretty much any position in front of or behind the lens. So again, overall, you can see the slight differences in viewing angles and field of view from the Tamron versus the G-Master. I can see the color differences. Again, I think the Tamron is a little bit more saturated and a little bit warmer just with the same settings on the camera. And I like that. It means a little less post-processing work, and again, it just looks better to my eyes. So really, that's it. Again, I chose the Tamron because it's smaller, it's lighter, it costs less. To me, it has slightly better colors than the G-Master, if you can believe that. It's weather sealed, it's f2.8 aperture, and it just makes your overall rig smaller and more lightweight. And if being slightly incognito when you're out in the world taking pictures is important, then again, the Tamron's a good choice for that as well. That big G-Master lens just draws attention to you, and if that's not something you want, then again, another benefit of a small lens. So I hope that was helpful. I know that when I'm searching for equipment and gear, I'm looking all over YouTube for comparisons, so I hope this comparison of these two lenses was helpful to you. We'll see you next time.